All right. I think we now have an in-person quorum.
Yes.
Accordingly, I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order at, call it 2:05 p.m. This is the scheduled meeting of the Jacksonville Housing Authority for Monday, November 29th, 2021. I do note that we have at least one, maybe two commissioners online with us today. Commissioner Green, it's good to see you. I'm going to go ahead and ask my commissioners here whether or not we can get a general consensus for electronic participation for Commissioner Green. If I could have a motion to that effect. So moved by Commissioner Griggs. Can I get a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Brock. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and call this to a vote. All those in favor of electronic participation for Commissioner Green and any other commissioner that is on the line signify by saying aye.
Aye.
No opposition. Commissioner Green, welcome to the party.
Thank you.
I think now we have some time set aside for public comment. I'll remind the public that this is the time if you'd like to speak up or address the commissioners here today. Would be your time to do so. Your comments would be limited to 3 minutes, and we will be tracking those here internally. And if you're participating online and would like to participate in public comment, we would ask that you either raise your hand or make yourself known. And we'll ask you to state your name and address for the record. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open up the meeting for public comment. Is there any public comment in the room today? None. Let's go ahead and check. Is there any public comment online today? Two. Three. Could you go ahead on, let's let the first one in. I can't see the name up there, but we'll just go ahead and start from the top. It'll be Ms. Barbara available?
Yes, I am available, but I do believe Sarah Wilson Craft raised her hand first.
Ms. Craft, this is Commissioner Walker. If you'd like to go ahead and start, if I could get your name and address for the record, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah Wilson Craft. My address is 1205 Broad Street North, Jacksonville, 32202.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Craft.
Okay, first of all, I want to say good afternoon and thank you to the commissioners and also Mr. Alexander, Ms. Parker, the other employees that supported our annual SAP Day event. Thank you so much. It was wonderful. As the Rad president, during our last resident relations meeting, multiple residents brought up the issue that they were having with Section 8 and the amount of money that is being awarded to the recipients of the HCV vouchers. It's very difficult to try and find safe, decent, sanitary housing for the amounts that are being allotted to the families. My question would be, does the Housing Authority petition to HUD to have those amounts raised or at least revised? Or is that something that the RAB could contact the local field office or federal HUD to see what we need to do, whether we need to petition with the residents or what exactly we need to do to get those amounts revisited and hopefully raised? Also, something else with the Section 8 homes that are listed, the Housing Authority provides a list. Are those homes inspected before they go on the list? I don't believe it has been the experience of some of the residents that have contacted the RAB board. The houses, they're going to them, they're filling out the paperwork, they're paying the application fees, the application processing fees, document fees, and really they're wasting their money because the houses have not been inspected yet. And when they do get inspected, they're denied or something to that effect. And then the residents are having to go and try and find something else, repay these fees, the gas they're having to waste, which is not cheap these days. I was just wondering if we could get the houses inspected before they go on the list that's given to the residents. That is the conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Craft. And Ms. Craft, during the chair's comments, we'll see if we can get some context on that for you. But since it is public comment, we don't want to engage in a back and forth session. I hope you can appreciate that. But I'll take that under the chair's comments and see if we can get some discussion. Who do we have next on the list?
Barbara Sanchez.
Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good. Can I get your name and address for the record, please?
Sure, it's Barbara Sanchez. I'm at 761 Village Center Drive, South. I'm at the Brentwood Lake Apartments. And I'd like to speak on or reiterate what Ms. Kraft spoke about. During our resident relations meeting, it was also noted that some of the areas or the communities in which the Section 8 vouchers were given are not safe for young women with children, with young female children or young male children. So I was hoping that at some time we could also address the areas or the communities in which these Section 8 houses are allotted or people are given the list to go. If we can be more stringent in the places that we pick for them. And that's all that I have to say about that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sanchez. Do we have a third? Anybody else? Public comment? Is there a Mr. Jeffrey D. that was trying to speak?
Hi, this is Jeff Douglas. I'm at 1633 San Marco Boulevard. And I'm afraid that my question may have been premature. I think I need to do a little more research. I'm joining the meeting because I was just concerned about a recent report on the percentage of single-family residences that were purchased by investors. And it was alarming. And Los Angeles, I know, has taken steps through the city to curb the purchase of their single-family residences by investors. And I just, forgive me, I just joined the meeting today, discovered that you were having it, and I didn't even know if you had jurisdiction or authority in that area. But that was my concern, and I'll just listen. But thank you so much.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Douglas. Any other public comments at this time? Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and close out the public comment portion of the meeting. I'll take a moment here under the chair's comments just to wish everybody a belated Thanksgiving, happy holiday season. It's now 1 day, is it 1 or 2 days away from December, and then we can start decorating for Christmas. So, Mr. Alexander, I see you're premature out there. We have to give the Thanksgiving the due that it's due. A couple of things. I do want to address Ms. Wilson's and Ms. Sanchez's comments. I think those are some good questions, Mr. Alexander, and I think they would be appropriately directed to the Resident Advisory Committee of the board, maybe to do a little bit of research and digging to see what the answers to those questions are and whether or not we can provide any guidance or assistance on those. So, Mr. Alexander, if you could make sure that those questions, specifically around vouchers, amounts, inspections before, I know there's obviously regulatory provisions that govern those, but I think it would be good to just be able to publish that to the RAB and to the residents so they understand, in a clear fashion, because Lord knows that they're not always easy to read and understand. Some of the other balance of the comments that I have, I do want to thank Mr. Alexander and the senior staff. Part of what will come up later today under the subpoena framework, and I'm sure it'll come up under Mr. Alexander's report as well, is we did get a response from Hilltop Villages. It was a lot of information. I don't know if how many people had the time to go through it, but it was revealing and led to some other questions. But I want to thank Mr. Alexander and senior staff for pushing that ahead. We also have a couple of presentations today to talk about. So I'd like to welcome our guests from the Post Real Estate Group. I think they're online today. We look forward to hearing from them. That's all I've got for today. Next, in front of you, you should have the meeting minutes from our last meeting, which took place on October 25th, 2021. Having reviewed the minute meetings, I did not have any corrections to it, so I would entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes as submitted.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion that we approve the minute.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Commissioner Brown.
25th,
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you, Commissioner Phillips. I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from October 25th, 2021, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposition? Hearing none, the minutes are so approved. Mr. Alexander, perhaps I'll hand it off to you for the introductions for the Post Investment Group.
Yes, we have thank you, Chair. On the line, we have Matt. Matt will give us a presentation from Post.
Hi, everybody. Can you guys hear me? Great. Hi. Well, thanks for having me, Chairman, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me the time to present. I'm here to talk about a new and innovative way to create a workforce and affordable housing by utilizing government purpose tax-exempt bonds to acquire existing market rate properties and then convert them to be income and rent restricted. I have a presentation I'd like to share my screen. Let me see if I can get this to work. Give me 1 second. Let me know if you all can see my screen.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
Okay, great. So the first part about this presentation is what is the problem? And the problem is that the United States is facing an affordable housing crisis. I would say Jacksonville is a key place where we're seeing significant rent growth and population growth, and with that comes increases in rents. And the real this program can target many different levels of affordability, but we've been focusing on serving what we call the missing middle, right? And what that is, it's families that earn anywhere between 60 and 140% of area median income, AMI. This includes essential workers, to the city, to the economy, first responders, healthcare staff, teachers, nurses, police officers, firefighters. These are families that typically they make too much money to qualify for a low-income housing tax credit property. Section 42 LIHTC serves mainly 60% AMI and lower. And the issue is that new construction, luxury new construction properties, developers, most market rate private developers, they're trying to get the highest rents possible to make their numbers work. So they're typically targeting people that make 140% AMI or greater. So what happens is we've got this whole group of families that earn, that they earn too much to qualify for the low-income housing tax credit properties, but not enough to qualify for the new luxury market rate properties with the fully amenitized market rate properties, and they're either forced to not live where they work, to travel and commute long distances, or they're forced to go live at Class B or Class C properties. So the program that we're describing offers us, enables us to take this market rate property that was initially built for 140% of AMI, but then reduce the rents of people that are living there that already income qualify, and also offer those units to families that typically could not afford those properties. So the solution is what I mentioned to you guys before, but we would be fully funding these properties with government purpose tax exempt bonds. These are not private activity bonds, so these bonds do not affect the state's volume cap. We would be converting 100% of the property to be income and rent restricted to certain AMIs. Each property is going to have we're self-imposing these regulatory agreements. So each property will have a different level of AMI depending. We would work collaboratively with the staff at the housing authority to determine what that property needs and which AMIs would make sense. And the other part about this structure is that the housing authority would be the sole owner of this real estate, right? So the housing authority would be the bond issuer. They'd be issuing the bonds, and they would own 100% of the land and improvements and benefit from all of the appreciation and potential cash flow. So the roles in this transaction would be Jacksonville Housing Authority as the bond issuer and the sole owner of the property, Post and Ascendo, which is our companies, it's our collaborative companies. We would be the project administrator, and we'll get into what we do and what our role is. And then we have a bond underwriter. We typically work with a company called Piper Sandler, and they would be selling these bonds to a single investor would be purchasing these bonds, and those bonds would be treated as debt. So the process works like this. So we would go out and identify, as a project administrator, we would identify these properties to purchase, either properties that are being listed on the market or potentially properties that are off market. We would actually sign the purchase and sale agreement. Post Ascenda would, sign the contract, and we would take all of the pursuit risks. So we're asking from the housing authority, they don't need to put up any money to buy these properties, and they don't need to take any financial risk to buy these properties. We're going to take all of that financial risk. And sometimes that comes with putting up, $1 million plus in non-refundable deposits, all of the third-party reports, all of the legal fees, all of the diligence costs that go along with that. The housing authority would, again, I'm sorry if I'm being repetitive, but would issue these bonds, and the property would be 100% funded with these bonds. So there's no equity. They're fully financed with the bonds. Before we close on the property, we're going to assign the contract to the housing authority, and then we'll close on it. You guys would close, or the housing authority would close as the owner. And then we would oversee day-to-day operations. Jacksonville is unique since you guys have your own property management company. We would work collaboratively with the property management company and be involved in the day-to-day operations. Again, this is addressing the missing middle. So displacement, this is a big piece of this that I would like to describe, is that nobody would be displaced, right? We are going and we're looking at acquiring existing properties that are occupied with tenants, right? So if people make too much money, we're not asking anybody to leave. They could stay at the property for as long as they want, and until they leave, we will then remarket that unit to somebody who income qualifies for whichever tier that we set for that property. However, the first thing we're going to do when we take over a property, and what we do is we look to see which families already qualify. Maybe there's families that are, naturally at 80% of area median income, but they're spending, 40 or 45% of their earnings to pay their rent. So we're capping it at a 30% rent to income ratio. So we are going to actually reduce their rent. That's the coolest part about this program, is that if we find families, and we're pretty sure that we will, in most of these properties that we're looking at, that already qualify for one of our set-asides, we'll actually lower their rent on their lease renewal. So unlike any other developer or real estate owner who's trying to raise rents, we're actually going to come and offer early Christmas gifts and say, hey, we're going to lower your rent by $200, $300, whatever that property and that rent set-aside happens to be. And again, if they don't qualify, we're not asking them to leave. They can stay as long as they want, and until they leave, we'll remarket that unit to a family that does qualify. The highlights, again, funded with government purpose bonds. The housing authority is 100% owner. We are typically looking at Class A properties. We also look at Class B properties, and we can do significant improvements. We can issue bonds to also rehabilitate the properties as well and to renovate them. And here's a big thing. So this creates housing, affordable and workforce housing, in 90 days. These deals take 90 days to close. So unlike the low-income housing tax credit program, which can really take, a year just to go through the application process and get your credits, and then it takes another 2 years to build it, you're not seeing those units, those affordable units, being created for about 3 years. In the program we're talking about, we're buying existing properties, and we're closing in 90 days, and there's immediate impact. Day one, we will self-impose that regulatory agreement. And the last highlight, which I've mentioned, that there's zero pursuit costs or financial obligation from the housing authority. So here's a case study. This is not a specific Jacksonville property. This is just a case study of another deal that we're doing elsewhere. The A bond we call is the senior loan, which is this is the loan that covers the purchase price and all the costs associated with buying the property, all the legal fees, the pursuit costs, all of the fees being paid. So we're looking at a 30-year loan that's interest only, and the interest rate on that is around 3.75%. So the bonds are 30-year fixed rate interest only loans. That being said, we don't want the housing authority at the end of 30 years to have a balloon payment of $90 million to pay. So what we're doing is we're modeling these deals where the housing authority would take their cash flow and use that cash flow to pay down their principal balance. And that's how we're looking at all of these deals. So in this case study, we're going to use 80% of that cash flow to pay down principal, and 20% that the housing authority keeps as just economic cash flow they could use for other places within their business to ultimately create affordable housing. Us as the project administrator, we get compensated in two different ways. We get an upfront developer fee similar to a LIHTC transaction, and that fee is, the upfront fee is really for us taking all of the risk for putting the deal together, and then putting up again $1 million deposits and all that risk from bringing the transaction from A to Z. And then we get what's called a B note, which is really a subordinate soft note to the transaction. So that gets paid interest only. The B note gets paid at the end of the bond term. So if this is a 30-year bond term, we get paid the $5 million at the end of 30 years. Throughout the whole period, we would be paid interest on that B note, and that would be a soft interest payment, meaning if the property has no cash flow, we do not take any interest on our B note. And that's really what marries the relationship together and what keeps us, it's basically our skin in the deal without having any ownership. In this example, we have, it's a 300 unit property. We're taking 100 of the units and setting them aside for families that earn at or below 70% AMI, 100 units at 80%, and 100 units at 100% of AMI. And this is, again, just an example. This is not specific to Jacksonville counties or anything like that, but this is an example, a real example of a different deal. And the way it works is, we have market rents, and then you have your in-place rents, right? So a market rent for a 1-bedroom is $1,340. Our lowest tier is $1,246. A 2-bedroom would be $2,165. It's $1,401. So if there's a tenant that lives at this property and pays $2,100 or $2,200, and they income qualify for that 70% AMI, we're going to lower that rent, $600 or $700 or whatever it is, and so forth and so forth. So on average, there's a 25% discount for the lowest tier, 15% for the middle tier, and then a 7.82% for the highest tier. On this deal, we were estimating about a $1.1 million rent reduction annually. Of if this were a market rate property, it could produce $1 million more in rents. This is a cash flow analysis, just so you guys can see. We're not going to go through this in detail, but you have your gross revenue that the property has, the expenses, then you're left with a net operating income. We have capital reserves. Every year we put money aside for any replacement reserves and capital improvements that the property needs. And then you have your interest-only payment. That's your interest-only payment on the $90 million. And that's the interest-only payment on our subordinate note, what we call the B note. And then you have remaining cash flow, right? So you have $300,000 after paying all of your interest payments and property expenses. 80% of that goes to pay down the $90 million, and 20% of that goes to the housing authority as cash flow. So you have your balance at the bottom of this cash flow. So it goes down every year, year over year. We're using the money from the property to pay off your principal balance. You go into year 11, 12, and it goes, this goes down while the cash flow goes up with natural rent growth and AMI growth. And then by year 30, you have zero balance. So by the time this loan is due, you guys there's no mortgage, and you're left with a property that's worth $170 million. I forgot exactly what we assumed it. It's got a $10 million net operating income with a cap rate on that. So you're left with, the housing authority in this scenario would make, $172 million at the end of 30 years. And that's between cash flow and then, sale proceeds at the end, because they have no principal balance on their loan. Our companies, Post Real Estate Group and Ascendant Capital, we're private companies. We're mission driven. We exclusively develop, own, and create affordable and workforce housing. We've done, in collectively over 100 transactions, 24,000 units, all over the country. We're excited to present to the Jacksonville Housing Authority. We think there's much needed housing in Jacksonville, especially now with what's going on in the economy. And we'll leave it open for any questions.
Great, Matt, thank you so much. Before I get into mine, any other commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Phillips.
And
Thank you for the additional detail that you provided. This was presented at the Finance Committee meeting, and I don't know if the chair wants to speak to it or not. But we did ask a number of questions, and some of that was answered with the additional detail that was provided this morning. I'll make the same comment today that I did at the Finance Committee. I was always told growing up, if something sounds too good to be it may be, and so you need to do your due diligence. I would just say that we need to do our due diligence as we look at not only this presentation, but all of the presentations that come before us. And because this involves bonds, we may need to ask our general counsel, bond counsel, to take a look at what's being proposed here. The other thing, and I don't know whether or not it was mentioned, I asked what they, he said a couple of times, I believe, that, there was no cost to the authority, that they're taking all of the risk, but they also manage the properties, was my understanding from the previous presentation, and they receive payment or fee for management of the properties in addition to the other fee that he talked about, the upfront fee and then the $5 million at the end.
Commissioner Phillips, that's a great question. Mr. Alexander or Mr. Avatal, would JHA manage these, or would these be privately managed?
The housing authority will manage it.
Okay.
Well,
They would just
but
be
he
the
said
asset
that,
manager.
Yeah, they would want to be the managers of
Okay.
the property and the previous fee.
Mr. Avatal, Commissioner Phillips brings up a good point. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. This is something this board's been talking about now for probably 90 days, getting our feet underneath us and figuring out what we're going to do. So thank you for that. It's much appreciated.
My pleasure.
The question that I had, and then I'll defer back to my colleagues, to Commissioner Phillips' point, is the B note and the upfront fee the extent of your fees, or is there an asset manager / project coordinator fee on top of that?
Yeah, there typically is, and back to the commissioner's question is yes, and we've partnered with many housing authorities around the country, and in all of those we've always managed the properties. And Jacksonville Housing Authority is unique that you guys have a fully integrated property management company, so we would oversee asset management, and there would be an asset management fee in addition to the two fees that were in the presentation.
And is that contemplated in your financial analysis as well, that fee doesn't adversely affect the economics hypothetically?
Not at all. No, it's actually built into the total expenses. That was a high level pro forma that I showed you. But there is a more detailed pro forma that we'd be happy to share in anything that we're looking at, and it would be built into the overall expenses for the property.
Commissioner Phillips, any other questions? Commissioner Griggs? You're welcome. Sure.
I had two questions, and perhaps my questions are more for Mr. Alexander than for the presenter. One, I'd like to know, because I know this is separate from what we do as a part of public housing, but is there any consideration for how this would relieve our waiting list, the pressures of our waiting list related to our customers who, who are still out there trying to get housing? Would a project like this in any way assist with reducing the pressure upon our waiting list for public housing?
Thank you, Commissioner Griggs. Any opportunity to present more housing would not drastically reduce it, but it would have an impact on some of the folks on the waiting list.
Okay. And maybe perhaps Mr. Abel, right? I don't know if there's a precedent for how, these two types of this type of effort, along with, public housing, if there is any synergy that can be created, or he was talking about tax credits and how some people might qualify to get discounts. How close are we to getting people who are currently in public housing into these units?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then how, so I want to see how that perhaps would help out.
So, very good question. Prior to the pandemic, we had about 1,800 people on our waiting list, and I mentioned this before. on Section 8, and part of that was because our waiting list was closed. But when we do open up the waiting list, we normally average about 5,000 people on our Section 8 waiting list. On our public housing waiting list, throughout the years, we normally maintain anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000. So on an average, we will have about 7,000, 8,000 people on our waiting list. Since the pandemic started, we have close to 41,000 people on our waiting list. And one of the reasons why we have so many people on the waiting list, because the typical people that was in the normal workforce housing, or people that in that workforce group, are now looking for low-income housing, which is actually pushing some of the folks that normally really qualify for that 30% housing out of the picture, or adding more people to the list. So anytime you add more housing to the overall housing stock in Jacksonville, that is relief in some type of way.
Okay. I think it would interest me if we could maybe perhaps, I don't know, through that committee to talk through the dynamics of how specifically as a goal, we're relieving the pressures on public housing, especially in light of the numbers you just cited. It sounds like it's getting worse instead of better, with the pandemic, and then we're actively trying to find ways to remedy that. But like anything else, I believe that we have a plan, a long-term overarching plan, and we see these things on the horizon, we can better plan for them. And, with this is, sort of amazing work that's being done around how to figure out how to solve some of these affordable housing problems, or what the new terminology is workforce housing for people. And we saw one of those with the ability housing project that's approved last week in City Council. Thank you for that, Mr. Alexander. My second question is, I know that we're going through this process, and we're looking at ways to diversify how we approach our housing needs in the community. But I'm certain that when we look at the information that's presented, Post, Real Estate, other organizations like that, when it comes to that point where we're actually prepared to act, we will be going through a procurement process, correct?
That's a great question. Is this a procurement process, or is this a?
Yeah.
Okay. As far as we wouldn't be using federal funds to purchase this property. So the only funding that's subjected to the guidelines is our own. I would suggest that we use it, some kind of process.
So that would be, Mr. Chairman, thank you for my recommendation that because we're being presented with a lot of very valuable information, and it's very good. I'm enjoying hearing all of the new and different ways that we can, spend money for nothing, right? And right, nothing's free. So I would prefer that as we get closer to this process, that we also hitch that to the committee where, to sort of iron out what that procurement process might look like in the event we decide to use one of these reputable firms in the effort to, to help us diversify our approach to solving our housing problem here.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any other questions, Commissioner Griggs? Commissioner Phillips?
I think some of that may be dependent on the genesis of the project.
Yeah.
If it's a property that we identify that we want to have redeveloped, or it's in a location, whatever reason we would use to select the property, then we would, I would think, have to put that out for bid for a partner to come in and work with us. It wouldn't be necessarily a procurement, but some kind of competitive approach where multiple providers, vendors might be interested in partnering with us. Now, they select a property, or they own a property and they want to approach us, it may be different, but whether it's federal money or because we are part of the city. The city may have some regulations or guidance on how we might procure a partner or get someone to work with us for a development. So I think it really would depend on how the project comes to fruition.
Commissioner Brock, I saw you had a question or a comment.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I was gonna say that in the finance meeting, we, as Commissioner Phillip have said, we had, this presentation given to us, but we also, to help, Commissioner, Charles on what his questions were. I know Mr. Alexander said that we had over 40 some thousand on our waiting list.
Yes, 41,000.
Right, but we just wanted to say that's counting, families with kids, all of them is in that number. It's not individuals, 40 some thousand.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Green, any comments or questions?
No, not right now, but well, I guess maybe the comment would be for the group is, like you were saying, the procurement process, kind of come up with the strategy on, what do we want to purchase? Whether it be low-income housing or the missing middle, like the presentation speaks about, and then how we want to purchase it. Do we want to do bonds, or we want to, work with a third party like this? So that's probably something that needs to be discussed sometime next year, and just, divvy that out, or, kind of grind that out and see what we want to do. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, hearing my colleagues, a couple of thoughts. The first of which is Mr. Alexander, I think you have an acquisition team, correct?
That is correct.
And I'm assuming that team is reviewing and has criteria and is looking at these opportunities.
That's correct.
Okay. So Commissioner Phillips, to your point, and Commissioner Griggs, to your point as well, I think it's prudent that we, clarify that. I agree. If a group, hypothetically, if a group brings a project to us and says, do you want to participate in this with us? I think that's a different conversation than we've identified, I'm making this up, Hilltop Villages, and we want to buy it. Then we probably need to go through a procurement process if we need an outside developer. But I think relative to projects that are presented to us, I think the acquisition team and the acquisition committee should have a set list of criteria. Does it check the boxes, right? Are we providing affordable/workforce housing? How does this impact our waiting list? How does this impact our bottom line? What are the financial pitfalls? The analysis. And to Mr. Avatal's credit, I think that's where those pro formas come into play. Understanding the thesis behind the project is important. And it sounds to me, Mr. Avatal, that's what you all do. And maybe that's a question for you, Mr. Avatal. Do you identify potential projects and bring them to us, or are you looking for us to identify projects and then say, help us?
That's exactly right. We would identify these projects and present them to the Housing Authority staff.
Okay. Commissioner Griggs.
And thank you for that, because I recall staff going out and doing a great job.
I agree.
Us with a packet of properties that they assessed, right? And some of those properties we may or may not be interested in, correct? And at that point, we may want to hire the services or bring in the services of someone like Post. At that point, then we are approaching them.
Correct.
Or if they just so happen to be, in the process of pulling in a project that was on our list, that looks like something that that we may want to be involved in because they're involved in it. But I just think it's better for us as an agency, as an organization, as when we get to a point where we're looking at how we spend or don't spend, right? Because of the relationship in this case, millions of dollars, that it remains some type of process, albeit the safest thing to do would be some type of procurement process, but some type of process that the committee is out that can meet the scrutiny of not only this board, but the community as well.
So, Commissioner Griggs, I concur. So I think what would make sense is to make sure that Mr. Alexander, the acquisition team, has a scoring rubrics of some sort, or an evaluation rubrics that as these opportunities are presented, you can evaluate them and provide it to the acquisition committee, who then can review it and make a recommendation to the board. And then relative to transactions that we want to pursue, it seems to me that there should be a procurement light process, so that, you know, if we decide to buy something and decide we need assistance, whether maybe it's the construction aspects of the deal or, you know, whatever, we have that process. So I think at the next acquisition committee, this should be something that is, you know, front and center so that it can come to the board for its consideration, which I think I'm on that committee, so I should probably get to work. Mr. Alexander, any comments?
Yeah, I just want to comment back on what Ms. Brock was talking about. She is correct. We do have 41,000 people on that, more than 41,000, but that could very well easily represent over 100,000 people. But I would also comment on this. In terms of our Section 8 program, we have a little bit more than 8,000 vouchers. And it took us a period of time to get those 8,000 vouchers. When I say the 8,000 over the last year, we got 163, or it was 163, 197 for the emergency vouchers during the pandemic, which just was a small percentage of vouchers considering how many people are in need of housing. When you look at our housing stock for public housing, we have the same amount of units we had for 1,000 years. I mean, actually, some of the housing units are dwindling down. So now technically we only have about a little bit more than 2,000 units. So typically when you think about advancement or dealing with these complex real estate deals in public housing, you can't go further than what the fair cloth is, and we have 3,100 total maximum units that we can fulfill. So even if we wanted to do public housing, we can only do a certain amount of public housing. And then Section 8, you have to almost go through the whole entire field office, go to Washington, D.C. to get the vouchers, and they are slow, very slow, considering the other pandemic that exists in Jacksonville, which is housing. And when you look at our occupancy rate, again, I have mentioned to the board, when you want to build real estate, you always look at the absorption rate. And in terms of occupancy with our Section 8 program, we are at 99%. 99%. So we have very little movement in our Section 8 program. So on average, we may average anywhere to 10 to maybe 20 people max. And that's stretching it on a monthly basis that people leave the program. The only way that people leave the program basically is through termination, or they may leave through the FSS program. And we have been very successful with the FSS program. But it's not enough. It's not enough. So we have to find a creative way to not so much public housing, low-income housing, affordable housing, and workforce housing. And the typical way of moving forward, as we have done in the past, we have to look at other alternatives. And I'll make sure I bring that to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. So one point of clarification, I want to be sure I'm clear about something. Hypothetically speaking, we would work with Post and Ascenda Capital, and they would set aside, I'm making this up, 100 units that would be at 80% area median income or less. Are you suggesting that there are or are not vouchers available for that, or that by virtue of the fact that the rents are restricted at that level, that would allow people to rent there without the need for more financial support?
Well, here's the thing. With these 41,000 people on the waiting list, a substantial amount of the people that's on that waiting list is a part of that workforce housing. What happens is if you move, are we able to move some of those folks off that waiting list, which gives to other low-income families a lot more opportunity or a lot better chance than it would be if you had all of these workforce housing people there. So moving them off here and be able to put them in this workforce housing here, which is 70% below.
So one second, Commissioner. So we're graduating, for lack of a better term, we're graduating people out of what would be our quote unquote low income housing to a workforce housing where it's kind of graduating them up a level. Is that the idea?
Yes, so
Okay.
let me paint the picture for you. We have, in our programs, we have public housing section 8. Out of our programs and up underneath our FSS program, we just recently had a graduation. We have 55 people to graduate for our program. They've done a very good job over there, but it was only 23 people that graduated from the program that graduated because they reached the FMR. So we're making progress, but we're making very slow progress. So when you look at the dynamics of this, the whole totality of how many people that we serve, 23, we're very excited and happy for the 23 people that were able to move off the program, but we're still not moving enough.
And that's because there's not enough housing stock to move them to?
Opportunities one.
Okay.
We always have to constantly present opportunities. But the ones that don't move off of there, where do they go? I mean, can we move them to workforce housing? Yes, we probably could.
Commissioner Phillips?
I just wanted to verify something that Commissioner Brock said, that the 41,000 includes the family numbers, but how many individual families does that 41,000 represent?
Good question. That 41,000 is 41,000 individuals that applied, but that may represent 100,000 because that individual may have 5 children with them.
That's exactly
Yes,
right. But
So-
I wanted to make sure that we understood that we're not talking about just 41,000
Right.
people. We could be talking about a couple 100,000
Yes,
people if they've got
exactly.
3 or 4 kids with those individuals.
That's correct.
Wow.
That's correct.
Mr. Avatal, did you want to comment?
No, sorry. I knew there was a need. I didn't realize how deep it was.
Admittedly, neither did I, Mr. Avatal. I thought it was 41,000, not realizing those are
Yes.
individual ticket holders, so to speak, or placeholders. Any other questions for Mr. Avatal? So Mr. Avatal, thank you very much for your time. This is extremely informative. I would encourage you to please keep in touch with Mr. Alexander. If opportunities present, to please let him know, and we will work diligently as a board to, put some things in place so we can make sure we're doing our diligence as we proceed as well. But Mr. Avatal, I thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your time and participation.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. Bye. All
right. Next on the list, speaking of new opportunities, so this is one that Mr. Alexander and I were approached. This is the Laura Street Trio, which is good to know. This is the Laura Street Trio that was downtown, and I had it added to the agenda today because it is a time-sensitive opportunity, although not binding per se, which I appreciated. It's come to our attention that Mr. Alexander and I were having a conversation, and it came to our attention that there is the desire to add some affordable housing units to the Laura Street Trio building, which is really interesting because that's not what you would typically think of as affordable or workforce housing in those units there. And the conversation was such that there's been conversation around basically JHA becoming an equity partner in the transaction and owning, basically a piece of the building itself, which was really interesting. The financial modeling that they showed us was interesting, but I wanted to bring it to the board's attention because it was a conversation that I had along with Mr. Alexander that I do think is something that should be vetted deeper by the acquisition committee. The ask is basically a $10 million investment, which would be outstanding for approximately 90 days, while the tax exempt bonds, which is what they're using, would then come in and refund us our investment. In exchange for that, we earn a fee for facilitating the investment. The units are restricted to what level, Mr. Alexander?
80% AMI.
80% AMI. And we would be, correct me if I'm wrong, an owner going forward with no investment in the deal. So Commissioner Phillips, to your point, perhaps too good to be true. But I do think it's worthwhile Mr. Alexander and the executive team pursue this, and I wanted to put that out there for comments and thoughts and questions.
To develop.
Southeast
Southeast
Development Group, Steve Atkins, Mr. Atkins. And I think he did the building next door, the Barnett building, as well. So it's worth, in my opinion, it's worth a consideration and review. I know they are looking to move quickly.
Across the street, not next.
I think it's across the street, right? I think so. They're looking to move quickly, but I would think this is something the Financial and Acquisition Committee should dive into and look at. And then, depending on that review, bring it to the board for its consideration. Any questions on that one? I just wanted to bring the board up to speed.
Interesting.
Well, I guess you all will probably ask this question, but what's the motivation behind including the housing authority?
I think it's several fold based on the conversation I've had. The first is that the project works financially much better if they can do tax exempt financing, which absent our participation, they can't do per se tax exempt financing unless they went through the low income housing tax credit route, which could take some time. There's also a desire, my understanding is that the Jacksonville city government has made clear that there is a significant desire for affordable housing to be downtown, especially in that core area. And the way to facilitate that would be through our participation. I'm being transparent. They've also apparently been watching our meetings and heard that, we're interested in expanding. So I appreciate somebody's listening. But I think that's where it's facilitating from. It's clear that it's a better financial deal for all involved if there's workforce affordable housing involved. But I think that's where that's where it's coming from.
Do we have any idea of how many potential units are involved?
I think it's 30 or 40.
Yes.
30 or 40 additional units.
Income.
But
Low income,
yeah.
strictly low income workforce. I think it's 120 total units in the tower. The part that's interesting to me, and this is what Mr. Alexander and I were discussing, is assuming that the finishes in those units are commensurate with the finishes that are in the other building, it's not something that you would think of as affordable housing. And what Mr. Alexander and I were talking about is it's nice that there are developers that are willing to do that. Granted, there's financial incentives, but it's an opportunity to integrate socioeconomic classes that otherwise would not ever integrate. So.
Just kind of a follow-up on Wyoming. Concern would be it was a much, thank you. That was the Barnett project was obviously a much larger project, I would think, or somewhat large, maybe not. But anyway, it was a project of some significance, and it had been vacant for quite a number of years. Similar to these, they were able to do that without this kind of finance. And so what makes the need for this financing is it, and that was at market rate, right?
Yeah, those are all market rate
Those are all
units.
market rate units that they've done over there. So again, as we look at projects like this, for a $10 million investment, that'll be paid back in 90 days. So it's a short-term bridge loan, it sounds like to me.
That's what it sounds like.
We just need to do our due diligence as well as look at opportunity costs. If we take $10 million to do this and another project comes along, that we would have 150 affordable units as opposed to 40, but we can't do it because we committed the money to this project. And projects, though, we would hope that the 90 days would be a good number, but so many delays are happening with these construction projects now, it seems. We just need to be cautious with any project and make sure that we do our due diligence.
I would concur. And I think like a project like this you'd almost want, guarantees too strong of a word, but very strong assurances that something like that would actually, that the transaction would unfold as anticipated. Otherwise, we're into a market rate property that we have no desire to be in for. But
And we're also talking 80%, I think you said,
Mhm.
which typically we deal with folks at what percentage of median income? 50 and below
Yes,
50
50,
and
60, and
plus.
80.
is typical. And when we talk about our wait list of 41,000
Mhm.
individuals or families, uh, those would be the people that we would be looking to serve, which would not be eligible for 80%.
We're not gonna be moving anybody off the wait list for this
No.
project.
well, that's an interesting question. In our waiting list, do we have them? Is there a way to organize them by area median income so we know who are in what brackets?
On the wait list, I don't think it's
Um,
criteria.
Normally, just like Jack speaks still, normally we take applications at the site. And most people right at the site are some of the same people that's on our waiting list. So when we reach out to them, if they don't respond because they made have found housing somewhere else, we normally pull them off, purge them off the list.
Okay. But at the moment, we don't have income certifications that would tell us who makes what.
No,
Okay. Interesting.
we don't certify them until we pull them off the waiting list.
Okay. So again, I think this is something that should go to the executive team and should go to the acquisition committee, who can then make recommendations to the board as a whole.
When they,
Mhm.
Chair,
Commissioner, go
when
ahead.
they apply to go on the waiting list, they know what the income guidelines are, or they don't know them at that
No.
time?
No, people just been applying just to be applying because they uncertain of what the future of their income may be. So anyone could apply for our waiting list.
Interesting.
Is that regulatory or?
It's been that way for as long as I've been in housing.
Well, my question is, I mean, is it regulatory? If it's been that way, is that a local decision or is that a federal guideline or?
Well, I don't know if it's federal or local, but it's a waiting list.
It would seem then that our waiting list may be overstated if people are not aware of what, if I make $30,000 and I'm a family of two, maybe I meet the guideline or maybe I don't. But if I knew that, I wouldn't apply if I made 50 because I exceed the guideline.
We do publish the
That's what I
income
asked.
brackets.
Okay.
Now, that comes from the federal government.
Right,
Okay.
yeah,
All right.
okay, yeah, that was what I asked. I thought they knew the brackets, so anybody that applies ought to be aware of what those brackets are.
Yes.
Okay,
But that
I was gonna
don't-
say that sounded something new to me, but anyway, okay, thank you. That's fine.
Any other questions on this one? Great. Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 8, which is on the agenda, approval of the union agreement. Ms. Mann, are you prepared to speak? Oh. Microphone? That's a little tall.
Good afternoon, Lori Nance with the law firm of Constangy Brooks Smith and Profit, and I'm outside labor counsel for the agency. And commissioners, we are here today to submit for ratification the collective bargaining agreement with Afscme Council 79. That agreement has been ratified. We learned last week has been ratified by the union, and we are submitting it to you all today for ratification. You should have in front of you a brief kind of snapshot of some of the most significant changes to that agreement, and I wanted to go over those with you all as well. First, this agreement is for 3 years, which is the maximum period allowed by law. It will be through 2024, September 30th of 2024. There were a few, there were several kind of cleanup changes to the agreement this year, which aren't captured in your summary. But just so that you are aware, we did do some cleanup of the agreement to reflect current practices, to also change some language to refer appropriately to the new employment policy manual and eliminate old references to that manual. And we cleaned up and clarified the grievance procedure, things like that. You have in front of you, though, a summary of some of the most significant substantive changes. First, with respect to Article 9, which is an article that covers hours of work and overtime, we made some changes to make sure it was clear that the agency does have the ability to change with advance notice to employees' schedules in order to avoid incurring overtime. We also added language this year in response to a proposal by the union that would make sure employees who worked 16 or more continuous hours would receive a paid rest period to the extent that they were required to be at work and that rest period overlapped with their regular schedule. They would receive a paid rest period. With respect to Article 10 wages, we had several changes. The first is in the form of across the board increases. And again, because this is a 3-year agreement, you'll see 3 years worth of changes there. The first year, which is going to be effective 10/1/2021, would be an increase to base pay by the greater of either $15 per hour or 6%. And so for those employees who do not yet make $15 per hour, their pay would be increased either to 15 or 6%, whichever was greater. For those employees who are already making $15 an hour or more, they would receive a 6% increase to their base pay. In the second year and third year, effective 10/1/22 and 23, the increase would be 3% or the 12-month CPI, whichever is less, to the base pay. The agreement, yes, Commissioner Phillips?
Before you leave that
Sure.
bullet, on the first sub-bullet, it says the increase to base pay by the greater of $15 per hour or 16%. So that's not an increase of $15 to the existing.
That's right.
It's $15
Yes,
base pay. That would be the base pay if the base pay is currently less.
that's correct. Yes, good point of clarification.
Because the way it reads, it kind of reads to me like it's going to be the greater of $15 or 6%, which would be an addition to. But I knew that's not we had talked about what was intended.
That is not what the agreement calls for. The agreement addresses anyone who's
Well,
not currently making $15 per hour, they would be raised to $15 per hour or 6% if whichever is greater. And for those already making $15 per hour, they would get a 6% increase. And that's what the actual collective bargaining agreement makes that clear. The summary may be open for interpretation, but I can tell you this, the CBA does make that clear. So thank you. And again, there are the increases for 2022 and 2023. In addition, each year there will be corresponding increases to the maximum pay grade for each classification. So this year, the maximum pay grade would be increased by 6%. Next year, it would be 3% or the greater of the CPI for 12 months. And then the following year would be the same, 3% or the 12-month CPI, whichever is less. The third category of increases provided for under Article 10 wages is merit increases. And those would be called for each year. It would be dependent upon the employee's most recent performance evaluation. And as long as the employees received at least a meets expectations rating, they would get some sort of merit increase. It would be either 3%, 4%, or 5%, depending upon their performance evaluation rating. With respect to Article 11, benefits, you may recall that for several years now, each year we've had to independently address any changes to health insurance benefit plans or contribution rates. And this year we have tentatively agreed with the union, subject to ratification, that they would be treated the same as non-bargaining unit employees with respect to health insurance. If there is going to be an increase in the employee contribution rate of greater than 5% from year to year, however, we will provide notice to the union and an opportunity to bargain over that increase before implementing it. Yes.
Question, when we say bargaining units will be treated the same as non-bargaining unit employees with respect to insurance, is that a financial, this might be more to Dennis, is that a financial change burden from what we currently are doing?
And I can answer that if you like. It has not been a change, practically speaking, and for as long as I can recall, we have been treating employees who are members of the bargaining unit or covered by the bargaining unit the same with respect to insurance as non-bargaining unit employees. The difference is that the contract, the collective bargaining agreement, hasn't stated that. We've had to negotiate changes each year on kind of a one-off basis. And now the contract will state what we have in effect done for the last several years.
Thank you.
I'll also mention something that is not covered in your summary, but it is a change to Article 11. And the agency has agreed to reimburse employees up to $175 for the OSHA-approved safety boots that they are required to wear, for any employees who are required to wear that. And that's once during a 12-month period. With respect to Article 21 holidays, the agency has also agreed to add a holiday for Juneteenth. Those are the most significant changes to the collective bargaining agreement, but it's also important for us to make sure the board is aware that we have, in conjunction with those changes to the collective bargaining agreement, received the union's agreement with respect to all the changes that were implemented in the revised employment policy manual. Many of those changes altered terms and conditions of employment. And so it was important that we be able to negotiate and reach an agreement on that. So we are pleased to report we've done that. And we are open to any questions that the board may have, as is Ms. Cook.
Commissioners, I'll open it up for any questions commissioners may have.
In the HR committee, one of the things that we discussed at our last committee meeting was the update of the employment policy manual. So to the extent that these things are covered in the employee manual, we will make note of that for that review and ensure that in the next revision that's published, we have included all of the required things once it's ratified.
Great. Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions? Commissioner Griggs.
Through the chair. So the changes, so y'all remember, y'all approved basically a new handbook in February, right? We got significant pushback from the union on that. And we kind of made an informal agreement that it wouldn't apply to union members until we had kind of gotten through it. So we got through it by connecting it to the CBA process. So now the manual that you all approved in February with about 4 very minor tweaks is in place for all employees, bargaining and non-bargaining. And so, I've been working with Board Member Phillips with the HR committee. So what we'll need to do anytime that y'all change those going forward, we just need to make sure that they aren't covering topics or making changes that would need to be bargained. And then hopefully if we can avoid that, we can separate it. Normally a handbook wouldn't come up in bargaining, but it was just kind of the nature of the beast this time. So the handbook is in place. It's valid for all employees. And I think the teams here are ready to use it.
So
does that answer your question?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I just want to make sure that last thing on the list, right?
Yeah.
Sounds great. I just want to make sure that some of that information info hadn't come back to us.
No.
So, sorry, Commissioner Griggs. So tagging onto this question, just to make sure I'm clear, I have in front of me the employment policy manual from February that says revised November 2021. Is this the manual that will be in place in effect going forward, and then secondary, has the HR committee reviewed this revision to make sure that this is copacetic with the board?
Well, it depends where you got that.
Yeah,
If it's the version that I emailed like a week ago to HR, then yes, that's
Okay.
the correct version. The HR committee has not, so they haven't seen, I think, the
final
4
we saw the
changes
red
that were
line.
made during bargaining. I don't want to speak for the committee, but I don't believe anything that we changed would give the committee or the board any heartburn. But we can certainly, you know, I can talk to the HR committee about it. But if it was anything that I thought would have caused an issue for the board or the committee, I certainly would have raised it. But I think they were pretty minor changes.
To be clear, assuming we approve the bargaining agreement here today, we would be agreeing to this revised employee manual, provided that we do not modify the substantive terms of that manual. It would not trigger a renegotiation of the bargaining, correct?
Yes, this is, we could do a day-long discussion of this, but let me try to summarize. There are some components of the manual that you all will be able to change as a management right, for example, without bargaining. But there are other components of the manual that if you change them and they affect a term or condition of employment, that you cannot change without bargaining with the union over that change. So we're giving you a very lawyerly answer, but it's very fact specific as depending on what you're changing as to whether or not you will be required to bargain over it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just changing anything in there does not violate the CBA. Like in general, you're not limited in your ability to edit that any more than you are at any time with your ability to edit policies.
Okay.
So by making it part of this round of negotiations, we didn't bind you in any way that you're not already bound. What Lori's talking about is just what the law requires. There are certain things you can change and certain things you can't. And that's true across the board, regardless of the fact that it was covered in negotiations.
Understood. Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners? So I will say this, my thanks to Ms. Van and Ms. Cook. I know this was a yeoman's task and sincerely appreciate it. I'd like to note that I'm very thankful to Mr. Alexander and senior staff and as well to the members of the union that were at the table. I believe this will be the first 3-year full-term contract. Is that correct?
In my memory, it is, and I've been working with the agency for many years now.
Okay. So I'm very excited that we were able to land on that level of commitment, you know, from the organization to our employees and frontline staff and do that. So with that, I would entertain a motion for approval in a second so we can enter into any discussion that might be needed.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the union agreement MOU and the 2021-2024 CBA.
A second.
I have a motion and a second. At this point, is there any discussion? Ms. Cook, Ms. Mann, before I move forward, was that motion sufficient for your approval processes? Fantastic. Hearing no discussion, I'll go ahead and call the question. All those in favor of approving the negotiated 2021 through 2024 terms collective bargaining agreement, signify by saying aye. Aye. Mr. Green?
Aye.
Thank you, sir. Is there any opposition? Hearing none, that motion passes. And thank you all and congratulations, Mr. Alexander, to the team here. Appreciate you for that.
If I could, through the chair, I just wanted to let the board know, like, your bargaining team did an amazing job. So Lori and I have both commented to each other since then. They were incredibly helpful and they really did a good job. So I just want you guys to know that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next. Oh, yes, Mr. Alexander?
No.
Okay. As I think as the board is probably aware, at the last board meeting, we talked about the subpoena framework and what we can and can't do relative to issuing subpoenas, putting it together, reviewing the information, and deciding on a framework going forward. I believe we have Mr. Alexander, and if you want to give us an update on where we stand with the subpoena framework with OGC. I'm not sure we have a policy to approve per se, but maybe an update would be great. And then I'd love for you to give us an update specifically on the response to our letter that we received from Hilltop Villages.
Thank you very much, Chair. So we actually had the discussion on whether we should send a courtesy letter allowing them 10 days to respond prior to sending a subpoena. Well, we crafted a letter and sent the management company a courtesy letter, hoping that they respond back. They respond back through their attorney, and they provided us with more than 100 pages of documents. We actually went through the documents and identified some of the key points in there. But it is my recommendation at this point, because of all the documentation that they provided, is that we will hold off on the subpoena, because the point of the subpoena was to require them to provide us with the documentation, and they provide us with a litany of information, and we have went through most of it, and we are in the process of crafting a summary. We came out with an initial summary, which was about 3 pages long, but it would be something a little more concrete that I think I will prepare to give it to the board.
So, Mr. Alexander, you'll be preparing then a summary for for the board's consideration and review on next steps. Am I understanding you correctly?
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And when would you expect that? Is that something we should expect in December or January? I'm not going to hold you to it per se. I will,
Well,
you know.
typically, God willing, we don't have any meetings in December. So we'll have it for you before January.
Great.
Yes.
I am curious. I don't know if anybody else had a chance to review any of the information that was provided. Mr. Alexander, I would ask, and I'll let my other commissioners comment on this as well. I mean, they outright state in their letter that they provided us information specific to address our primary concerns, which I found an interesting way to phrase things, as apparently they think we have only one primary concern. Right. Part of what we want to look at here is it goes beyond the scope of the quote unquote rodent issues, at least the complaints that we've seen. So are you anticipating potentially following up with them and asking for additional documentation?
Yes, but so far what they sent seems to be some of it's general and some of it's specific.
Okay.
Notices to the residents, what pest control activities that are taking place on the property, and just about everything you could possibly think of, they had listed in a report.
Okay.
So once we go into more detailed report, I have an overall general summary, but once we go into more specific information, we can pretty much tell you exactly what it is. They did provide us with a great deal amount of their work orders. So we're still going through that as well.
Okay. Mr. Griggs?
They basically stating that they're only going to provide us certain information based on what they think that we want. Mr. Alexander, like per Mr. Chairman's request, I think you're probably going to end up responding back to them.
Right.
And I don't know if your request, I would be interested in knowing what the residents had to say about services provided in response to those work orders.
Okay.
Because apparently they've been turning the wheel, but it hasn't been getting the desired results.
Right.
So that would be interesting in, but yeah, they pretty much believe that we're only interested in one thing, but we are interested in more of a
Exactly
global perspective of how tenants are being treated.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Griggs. Any other commissioners?
Yeah,
Mr.
just to
Phillips?
Follow up with what Commissioner Griggs said. Just because they're busy and they've got a lot of work orders hasn't resolved the problems and the concerns that the residents have. I think is ultimately what we're interested in knowing is, it's great that they've got all these work orders that they're working on, but are they resolving the issues?
Yeah, Commissioner Phillips, I agree. Yeah, Mr. Alexander, one of the things that I go back to for me on this is exactly what Commissioner Griggs, Commissioner Phillips are is, yes, that may to them be the primary concern, but it's not us. And I would go back to this, which is we're on record numerous times saying this would be a whole heck of a lot easier of a process if you would come in, sit down, talk to us, present at a meeting, so we can have an open dialogue versus what is now turning into, to my esteemed colleagues at OGC, a letter writing campaign,
Right.
you know, and playing coy around with what we're asking, what we're not asking. So I would ask that we make that request again, that instead of, you know, doing it this way, we would prefer that they come in, management, ownership, sit down with you and have a much more detailed conversation than what this is going to result in. Commissioner Brock, anything? Okay. Anything else on this matter? Commissioner, good Lord. Mr. Lohr, we've been waiting anxiously for you.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. The Finance Committee met on November 15th, and we reviewed the October 31st, 2021 financial statements. October is the first month of our new fiscal year. And for the fiscal year, for the first month, our total operating income was $873,067. Now, you'll notice on the year to date that we have our Rad properties with a very large number. Our Rad properties are on a calendar year basis, so we're reporting those on a calendar year, and then the rest of the Housing Authority's properties are on the fiscal year. So we'll start off with the operating revenues for the central office. We're at 9%, budgeted at 8.33%, so we're doing very well with the central office. And then our expenses are very low at 7.86%. For public housing, our revenues are slightly over budget at 9.17%. And our expenses are at 8%, so just slightly below what our budget is. And then for our Section 8, our operations piece, our income is slightly less at 7.35%. This is due to the HUD allocation of our admin fees. And then our expenses are also low for Section 8 at 6.37%. For Gregory West, we're right on track with our budget at 8.19%. And our operating expenses at Gregory West are low at 7.37%. Brentwood Park, our income is just above where we should be, so we're doing very well with our income. And our expenses are slightly below budget, so we're doing very well at Brentwood. Our estimated reserves were almost at $42 million at the end of October, and this takes into consideration our available cash on hand and subtracts out all of our liabilities. So that's all taken into consideration with our reserves. For our quick ratio and our MENAR, our quick ratio is averaging between 4 months and 29 months. And HUD rule says that anything above 4 is good. So we are excellent there. Yes, sir.
Mr. Lohr, quick question on this. So you say anything above 4.
Yes.
So I read 4.02. Could you
Yes.
dive into that for me a little bit on Fairway at Oaks, please?
Yeah, so the quick ratio, Fairway Oaks has one of the lower cash balances. So we were able to cover our expenses 4 times through the quick ratio.
So understood, but you know, that's passing, but maybe not necessarily excelling. So is there are we anticipating a change in this? Is there something, we need to be considering differently about this project?
For public housing, no.
Okay.
We don't have any debt. It's just a matter of operating the project at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
For our MENAR, we're doing very well also. We're at 11.87 months. That's very good. We can operate almost a year if HUD decides not to give us any operating subsidy for the next year, which we don't see happening. For our Rad properties, we are again on the calendar year basis. So for the waves, our income is creeping up. We're at 82.21%. So we're catching up to what our budget, what we expected for our budget. So that's very good. Our expenses are still a little bit high at the waves. We're at 101% currently. For Centennial Towers, our income is at 72%. This is due to the occupancy during our remodel. And our expenses are also under budget slightly at 77.94%. And then finally, for Hogan Creek, our income is at 43%. This is due to closing the property in the middle of June and having only 4 full months of operations. And then our expenses, we have some expenses related to RAD in here. We're at 66.43%. Any questions?
Commissioner Phillips,
Can we see the waves again?
could you pull back up waves?
So we do anticipate at some time, the expenses, I think it's more of what, yeah. How are we on the leap up? Where are we at this point?
It's 100%.
It's 100%. So, given this is a new property, I guess my question is, why are the expenses exceeding the anticipated?
I think during the initial year, there were some expenses that weren't anticipated, and it's just driving it over just a little bit.
Okay, without having a dollar number, I don't know if
Right.
the percentage, if that represents 2,000 or 200,000 is why.
So,
The difference.
Right.
To tag on to Commissioner Phillips' question, so are these normalized expenses or they're not normalized because we're in lease up?
They're not normalized because we're in lease up.
Okay,
Well, he said it's 100% lease.
right.
Right.
But for the calendar year, it wouldn't have been normalized operating expenses? Mr. Lore? Okay. Is there a way that you could provide us a variance report on this for the board?
Absolutely.
If you could email it to the board, that'd be helpful.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Any other questions for Mr. Lore?
Was there just an unforeseen expense for the Waves property? More like large expense?
We had some high expenses in October that weren't anticipated. There was some RAD consulting with Cohn Resnick, Bank of New York, and First Housing. And then also some RAD fiscal fees. Bank of New York bond issuer fees were in there. And interest expense on the permanent loan for October was $36,000 in October. So that kind of pushed up the numbers.
And these were not anticipated to share what you said, that these were
Correct.
unanticipated expenses?
Correct.
Seems like we would have anticipated the interest, but maybe not.
Yeah, it was interest related to the permanent financing that we just received, and we didn't have the information before that.
Mr. Lore, I think, if you could circulate a variance report, that'd be helpful so we can get some more details. And just as a matter of course, Mr. Lore, I think it'd be helpful that any budget that exceeds 100% of expenses, as a rule of thumb, should have a variance report attached to it, just so we can lay eyes on it. And that can go through Finance Committee first, of course.
Okay.
Any other questions around the financials? Great. Thank you, Mr. Lore. I believe we have only two resolutions or board actions on the agenda this week. My understanding is, Mr. Green, and I'll just get your nod or approval, is that both of these went through the Finance Committee for their pre-approval. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was there any particular issues the Finance Committee felt appropriate to bring up at the board meeting here?
The dollar amounts are large. I know the one is for 507,600. That's resolution 33, but from my understanding, it's something that, can't be avoided, cannot be avoided, so that it needs to, get done, and it has, I want to say, been budgeted for.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, Mr. Lohr, is that accurate? The 507,600 is budgeted for?
That's correct.
Is it coming out of repairs and reserves, replacement reserves?
It's correct, coming up, that's correct, it's coming out of the capital fund.
Okay. And I assume, and I just want to look here, I think I saw in the package, which I don't have it right in front of me, apologies, this was through the procurement process, awarded
That's
accordingly. And are these the low bids for each?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
I think, did one of them only have one bid?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's the plumbing.
The plumbing, yeah. Okay. Any other questions around these? If there's no specific questions, I'd like to take them on bonk if that's acceptable to the board.
Move the approval of the resolution.
I've got an approval in a second from Ms. Phillips and Mr. Griggs. So there's a motion on the table to approve JHA Resolution 2021, JHA 33, and JHA 34. Any discussion on these? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, those two resolutions are approved. Mr. Alexander, would you like to dazzle us with your report, please, sir?
Yes, I'll make it very quick. I just want to acknowledge the FSS program. On November the 4th, we had 55 graduates from that program. 9 of them was brand new homeowners, and 23 of them went to FMR. So I want to acknowledge Ms. Parker. They've done a very good job over there. But we were very excited that we have 55 graduates. That was probably the largest group of folks we had in a very long time. Also, we had a discussion with the board. We did mention, you asked before, Commissioner, about the CNA. We do have the CNA out on the street for procurement, and we're waiting to get a response back on that. Also, with our Rad projects, we are at Centennial Towers. We have went from the 14th floor down to the 5th. We anticipate the 5th floor is being punched now, and the next 4 floors, we anticipate those 4 floors being completed by the end of February. So hopefully end of February, beginning of March, we'll have our grand opening there. The overall construction should be done around that period of time. The elevator 1 has been completed, is testing this week, and then they'll start on the next one. In terms of Hogan Creek, and it's not really a riddle, but 16 residents moved on a 16th floor on November the 16th. So
is that intentional, Mr. Alexander?
No, it wasn't. It just happened that way. 16 residents moved in 16 units on the 16th floor on the 16th.
Wow.
Yeah, so that may
And I'll be playing the lottery later today, Mr. Alexander.
Okay.
And the 15th floor is near finish, and the 14th, the 12th, and the 11th floor are being, the 14th and the 12th are being done, and the 11th floor is being relocated as of right now. We are looking to possibly do something with Twin Towers underneath the RAD program. We'll bring that before the board soon. We currently have some capital improvements out for that site. We learned from the previous RAD deals that if they have any capital improvements, it's just duty for the agency to get these capital improvements done prior to converting these to RAD programs. Also, I gave you all a copy of the delegation of authority. You can look at it and get back to me on it. I I didn't give it to you in advance, so you can't really look at it in such a short time, but you can take it with you and we could talk about it at the next board meeting. And also in your package, you have, thanks to the IT department, Ms. Evan, we have the new access for the portal where the commissioners can actually put your code and password in it and go on the portal and get your board reports moving forward. And it'll show you where you can go in there and get each board report up to a year in there.
Would this then also allow this to be our J. Chud Commissioner email address? Do we have email addresses
Yes,
associated with this?
yes, you all have emails. You haven't, right, Mr. Charles, they haven't been activated, but we tried to give everyone emails at one point.
Okay, if somebody can tell me what it is, that'd be great, because I still am receiving emails periodically on my personal.
Okay.
So I'd much rather have a commission email.
Okay.
So,
For
Mr.
sure.
Alexander, to your point, I sincerely appreciate this. This is quite commendable.
Yes.
You know, this portal for where everything's stored. So much thanks to the IT staff who took the time to do this. This is quite useful. My just question, not saying one way or the other, but is it assumed that going forward we will just log in here as opposed to being handed materials, or will they still be printed, just so I know how to prepare?
Yes, you can log in and get any board report, but it's just been a good process because we was actually looking for software to be able to create board docs, and we gave them a presentation on how we presented our documents. It's just so easy to drop them into an email, drop them in your calendar and drop them in a calendar invite and just send them to everyone. But they will also be on the portal if you choose to go right to the portal and get them.
Okay.
Just for some strange reason, you didn't get the email or couldn't find the email that's on the portal for you.
Okay.
But I will make sure, Commissioner Phillip, today that all the commissioners have their emails.
Okay.
Or activate them.
Okay. And then Commissioner Brock, sorry.
I have mine, Mr. Alexander, and it's activated. Thank you.
Relative to the delegation of authority, I would ask that the commissioners each take the time to start going through and marking this up. This is just, I think, a sketch outline of where we're headed.
Yes.
So I'll try and provide some feedback. Is OGC working with you on this, Mr. Alexander? Or are you doing this first and presenting it, and it'll go through governance?
No, we
It's a
actually use,
softball.
yes, yes. We actually use some of the guidelines that we currently use or what HUD use, and just put it out there to the board to take a look at it, give me their opinion.
Yeah, I'd like to have this wrapped up by the end of Q1 of next
Yes.
year. I don't see a need for that to drag on much longer than that. I
Yes.
think we can put our heads together and get to a policy. So I think Q1 should be
Yes,
when it's in front of the board for final approval.
that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Alexander? So one other thing, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, I wanted to ask about HR and staffing. How are we on HR and staffing wise, relative to the organization?
Our actual numbers are increasing.
Okay.
I believe we're about 189 to maybe 190 employees now, which is probably the largest we had since I've been here, which has been a very short time. We have been interviewing. We had just received a group of resumes for the COA position, the COO position. And last week we did spend time interviewing for the resident services director, and we have a couple more scheduled this week. So we're going week by week, and just not so much the upper level, all the positions we're trying to fill as soon as possible.
Okay. So I think we had talked about a while back, like a year-end goal. Do you think that's still feasible, or are we going to slip into January?
We may go into January because some of these resumes, as most jobs, look very impressive, but the interviews do not represent some of the resumes. So we just want to make sure that we get the right person to be a right fit with our organization for the direction that we're going.
Okay. I have one other topic, but any other commissioners? Commissioner Brock, Commissioner Brock, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was thinking we were gonna have new business on our agenda today.
We can
Chair,
add that
Mr.
next
Chair.
if you'd like. Any other well, let's do that right quick. I'll exercise privilege and want a new business line. Any other questions for Mr. Alexander, though?
Just a quick follow-up, Chair, to Mr. Alexander, as you talked about the graduates from FSF,
Yes.
the self-sufficiency program, that is impressive that you continue to move forward with that. But given we've got so many dollars in reserves, is there a way to scale that program up so that we increase the number of people? Because obviously, as we graduate people out of public housing, that opens up units for other people who may
Yes.
be in need of it. And I know that over the years, there has always been a struggle for funding in order to support some of the programming activities. Could we, and maybe it waits until we get the new resident person, but if we can get a plan in the first quarter of next year, maybe, Mr. Chair, about how we would scale up the FSS program. I know in past years, we've worked with United Way on some of their campaigns for self-sufficiency that allow folks to take a portion of their rental fee or whatever and set it aside so it would help to go towards a down payment assistance and those kinds of things. Can we look at some creative ways? Because the program income that we have, we could utilize for FSS, if I'm not mistaken. And it may be a way for us to, again, free up some units in public housing as we help existing residents to grow out of public housing.
Yes,
So,
ma'am.
that's something that I would be very interested in, and the appropriate staff I'd like to talk with relative to the kinds of things that we might look at doing.
For sure. Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Just tagging on that to Mr. Alexander, one of the things we had talked about is potential consolidation of staff into a central location, potentially then being able to use this building or something else to develop more public. We still have allocations available for public units, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Where do we stand on that process? Has there been any substantive process? Or are you still reviewing?
Well, we're still reviewing. We're actually looking at a couple deals. We went out and looked at a couple units. We're looking at we've been in discussion about developing some units in terms of consolidating, putting staff all underneath one building. We actually went out and looked at a couple buildings. So me, along with the acquisition team, are being very aggressive in trying to acquire some properties as well as acquire office building.
Great. Any other questions, Mr. Alexander? All right. Thank you, Mr. Alexander. We are going to, it's not on your agenda, but we will go ahead and open it up for new business. Ms. Brock, I think you had something you want to bring up?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I was thinking that I know that the building now has reopened from COVID-19. Our building has reopened, but a few months back before you came on the board, I had asked that we would reward our staff for them working diligently under COVID-19. They faithfully have been working, and I know that if I make no mistake, I believe that the city just awarded their staff with a bonus or an incentive from them working under COVID-19. And we do have monies available that has been allocated for COVID-19. So I was thinking that those staff members that has been with us for up to 5 years, that they would get maybe $1,500. Those that have been here 6 years or longer would get $2,500. And that our CEO would be included because he has not been here 5 years yet, but he would be included with the staff that would get the $2,500. And I was just thinking that we should do that, especially now we got a new variance that they're talking about that's coming out. Some of our staff has worked so faithfully. I mean, through all of this. I mean, even being sometime exposed and having to go home, all of that. Some losing family members. So I just wanted to put it before the board again to see if there's something that we can do as a board to appreciate our staff here.
Thank you, Commissioner Brock. I'll demur to my colleagues on the board. I wasn't obviously here and privy to those conversations. Maybe I don't know. And then my first question would be, you know, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Lohr, are there funds set aside for this specific purpose?
There's not funds specifically set aside. I would say we would, but we do. Label it as hazard pay. The COVID fund side.
Commissioner Phillips?
I'd just like to hear from legal about this, if we could.
Thank you. So through the chair, I will just say, I mean, obviously this is a board call. I will say, the union asked for bonuses and we said no. So just for context, and we would have to quote unquote bargain a bonus with the union. Not that they would probably object, but you know, we would have to have some sort of agreement with them on that.
Commissioner Phillips?
Before you sit down, Commissioner Brock mentioned that the city of Jacksonville had did something, awarded some kind of
right
COVID pay to their employees.
So some of the bargaining units included, I think the ones I'm thinking of off the top of my head were $2,500. I mean, of course, we don't use the word bonus because that's not allowed.
Right.
But yes, that's accurate. That was bargained with the unions.
And it was for COVID specific?
Different unions use different language, but I think in general, it had to do with COVID. Yeah. I can't get too specific, but yes, in general, it was not like here's COVID pay, but in, you know, for different unions, it was worded differently, but it was generally speaking in recognition of the last year and a half of insanity.
Bit more information on what actually.
Yeah. 1 second, Commissioner Phillips, then Commissioner Griggs, then Commissioner Brock. But to Commissioner Phillips, to your point, I think that would be helpful if we could just understand a little bit more about how that transpired.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you it transpired through bargaining. What the
Okay.
actual contract language is, I can get for you, but it was negotiated with the unions during bargaining.
Okay, so, but you just said that we wouldn't, even if we decided to do it, it would have to be bargained.
Correct.
Commissioner Griggs? Commissioner Griggs, I think that's a great idea. So, you know, absent any objection, Commissioner Brock, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's the reason I brought it to the board. I just wanted to get your support for it to go through HR committee on that. I wasn't calling it a bonus. That's why I didn't know. And I refer back to what Mr. Dennis said. He called it hazard pay. So I didn't want to refer to it as a bonus. And I was thinking in terms of the union members as well as our non-union members that would get this. It would just be one time And it's not something we would be doing all the time, but it's just an incentive because they have worked so faithfully through all of this.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Absent any objection, I'd like to go ahead and task this with the HR committee to make a recommendation to the board. My only comment was to be mindful of the CBA we just negotiated with the raises that we just handed out. I'm only cognizant of that, not saying that this isn't well-deserved, just cognizant of the overall impact to our financial budget, because we did just increase that substantially on the pay scales. So, but thank you, Ms. Brock, for bringing that up. Commissioner Phillips?
And as a part of the review by the HR committee, we'd like to see what the financial impact of it would be. I mean, I can rough estimate in my head, but.
Yeah. Great. Any other new business to be brought before the board today? Great. I do have one other thing, and I apologize. This will require some OGC input. This got waylaid. This was brought to my attention right as I was coming on as board chair. It's understand it's an initiative that we looked at, but it did not move forward. We just got lost in the shuffle, which is our resident commissioner. I've talked with OGC in the past, and this is something that would have to be discussed at a public meeting. It can't be discussed privately. So I'll bring it up today, which is to say there had been some discussion around a stipend or a cost offset or providing some level of, technological assistance to our resident commissioners. I would like that to be put back out probably to the governance committee, because I think it starts there to see what the implications of that would be, how it would be done. It's something that, as a resident commissioner, you've done a yeoman's job being here and being involved, and that's something that is above and beyond maybe than what the rest of us would be expected to experience. So it is something that got lost. It's something that was brought up to me that we might want to bring back up and look into to see if that's something that this commission might choose to do relative to a stipend or technological assistance or whatever we can do for our resident commissioner. So I'll task that, Mr. Alexander, to the governance committee to start looking at and to see if there's anything to do there, and then it can make recommendations to the board, as I think it has more to do with legally what we're allowed to do, because I don't think we can pay our board members. So we'll start there with that. But I wanted to bring that back up as well.
Thank you. Have we previously provided technology?
To my knowledge, I don't think we have, it's not like we've handed out a laptop or handed out access to it. I think it's always been self-sustaining from the resident commissioner. That's my understanding. Any other questions? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Commissioner Grid, seconded by Commissioner Brock. Any discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Hearing none, we are so adjourned. Thank you all very much for your time today.